Actually, scene one. We've just left Macbeth setting himself to the fact that he is actually going to go through this murder. And we switch to the night time of this same day. Banquo and his son Fleance are walking through the courtyard of Macbeth's castle, and Banquo stops and points out that there are no stars out this night. And if we remember, both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have asked to be covered in darkness. Macbeth went as far as say, stars hide your fires. So it's no surprise to the audience when Banquo turns around and says, look, there's no stars out tonight. And as Macbeth enters, he and Banquo begin to get into a conversation. Banquo is asking to speak with him because he says that he's had this dream about the three witches, and he is concerned that the witches seem to have revealed some truth. Although Macbeth at this point then starts to lie, and he says, well, I haven't thought anything about them. Perhaps we can discuss this later. And Banquo and Fleance leave. Then we're back with Macbeth, and we've got this iconic soliloquy here where he talks about seeing a dagger in front of him that seems to be floating in the air and marshalling him along to where he needs to go. He wonders if this dagger is going to be real or if it's a dagger of the mind. And he decides that perhaps it's actually a manifestation of his unease over killing Duncan. He sort of comes to his senses as he hears the bell toll, which is Lady Macbeth's signal that the chamberlains are asleep, and he goes off to commit this horrific deed. So looking a little bit more closely at this language then, we see an interaction between Banquo and Fleance, and we don't actually see Fleance very often in the play. He's actually only in this scene and the one in which he's murdered. But the interaction between Banquo and Fleance is notable in the sense that it sets the scene for the deeds that are going to come. Banquo says to his son, there's husbandry in heaven, their candles are all out. And he's referring to the idea of the stars of being thrifty and trying to save money, so therefore they've not lit their candles, the stars aren't there. And this automatically links back to Macbeth's desire for the stars to hide their fires, for them to not be shining so that he's not seen when he commits his horrific deed. And Banquo continues and he says, a heavy summon lies like lead upon me, and yet I would not sleep. Referring back to the fact that he is troubled by what he's heard from the witches and the supernatural, meaning that he's not actually able to rest and to sleep. And he begs for the merciful powers, so he begs for heaven to restrain in him the cursed thoughts. He doesn't want to be thinking about these evil things that the witches have said to him. And then Macbeth arrives, and initially Banquo is startled. He says, give me my sword, who's there? But Macbeth says a friend, which is somewhat ironic because we know that although they have this friendship and there is a loyalty between them, things are going to go very, very wrong very quickly. And Banquo points out to Macbeth as the play goes on and this scene goes on of how respected and how loved Macbeth is at this point. He talks about the diamond King Duncan has given to his wife out of love and out of a sort of recompense for everything they've done for the kingdom. And Banquo continues and he talks about, I dreamt last night of the three weird sisters. To you, they've showed some truth. He's troubled by what he's seen and he's thinking about the prophecies coming true, and it's troubling him. But Macbeth then lies to him and he says, well, I don't think anything of them. And as the audience, we know that he lies. We know he's being duplicitous here because we've seen him plotting with his wife to kill the king. But yet he's lying to his best friend and he's choosing not to tell him that he's also troubled by them. And so we begin to see the fractions come between these two people. We begin to see Macbeth becoming very secretive and he's hiding things and he doesn't want to talk to Banquo anymore. He wants to conceal what his thoughts and feelings are. Banquo and Fleance leave, and we're left with Macbeth on his own on the stage. And we're about to read perhaps what is the most iconic speech in any of Shakespeare's plays. We get to see the internal thoughts and feelings of Macbeth as he is about to go and commit this murder. He's wrestling with his conscience here. He doesn't know if he's actually going to be able to go through with this planned murder of the king. And we need to think carefully about this symbol of the dagger. It could be a manifestation of his ambition, of his pride, of his conscience, of his masculinity. It could be a manifestation of his doubt. There's been so many different interpretations by directors. If you watch some of the films and some of the plays where it's reimagined, Some directors will choose to actually have a physical dagger on the stage with Macbeth. Some of them will choose to have some sort of shadow or trick of the light, or to not have it at all. Sometimes some of the versions I've seen the witches leading him, or I've seen Lady Macbeth even leading the way. And it's a really interesting section of the play to look at because it tells us so much about Macbeth and about his character. So this language here, we start with Macbeth on the stage and he asks this rhetorical question: is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle towards my hand? And we're immediately in his psyche with him. We're thinking about, is he genuinely seeing a dagger? Is it a manifestation of his mind? You know, what is actually happening here? And he questions himself. He says, you know, are you a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeded from the heat oppressed brain? And he's questioning his own sanity. He doesn't know at this point in the play if what he's seeing is real. And I think at this point, he's actually questioning himself, you know, is he going to have the ability, the actual sense of him going to do this hideous thing? And he questions it and he says, you know, it's marshalling him the way that he's going. It's showing him what needs to be done. And he then questions his eyes. He thinks, you know, is it making a fool of him and his other senses? Because he still sees him. And as he blinks, he then sees this dagger covered in blood, which wasn't there before. And it's kind of foreshadowing the fact he is going to go through with him. And then he moves on and he says, you know, nature seems dead and wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep. This idea that already he's tormented, even the thought of what he's going to do is tormenting him. It's creating this idea that he can't sleep. Witchcraft has kind of seeped into him and he can't escape it. He mentions Hecate here, or Hecate, or Hecate, depending on which mythological legend you listen to. And she is the goddess of witchcraft. She's also symbolized by the crossroads. She is the goddess of the crossroads, and it's a turning point for Macbeth here. And the fact that he's referencing her, you know, this Greek goddess is really telling, because this is the crossroads of the play. Obviously, it is a 5-act play, and we know that if he doesn't go through it, it's going to be a really boring play. So we do know that he's actually going to go through with it. But if we take a step back from that and we involve ourselves in the action, we can actually see how tormented he is already. He then goes on and he personifies death as the withered murderer. And he's been alarmed by the wolf who's howling to sort of say this is all going to happen. And then he asks that the sure and firm set earth hear not my steps. He doesn't want to be caught. He knows that what he's doing is wrong. And we need to understand that at this point, he absolutely understands that what he is doing is a terrible crime. He knows he's committing treason and he knows that he's damning himself to hell. But there's still a little bit of hope in him that he's going to get away with this. And then these final 3 lines of the scene where he says, I go and it is done. The bell invites me, hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. And there's a double meaning here. There's literally Duncan's death, which is coming upon him. But perhaps more importantly, he understands that this action is going to condemn his soul to hell, and he will no longer have that viable option of heaven. And that rhyming couplet that ends the scene, again, sort of sounds almost prophetic in the way that it comes across. It is very supernatural. It reminds us of how the witches speak in rhyming couplets. And it's that very ominous sense of the bell ringing. And these are the final stages of this scene. And he's made this decision and it is all over very, very quickly. You need to make sure you know this scene inside out. It's really important because it is so crucial in the play as a whole. This final turning point in the play. So there's several things, again, that you can do with it. You can draw it, create that picture of Macbeth with the dagger in front of him, remembering to include those key quotations to help you nail them down. Imagine it. How would you direct Macbeth at this point? Would you have him frantic? Would you have him in control? Would you have him hallucinating? Perhaps try and watch it. If you just type into Google or into YouTube, Act 2, Scene 1, is this a dagger? And you'll see so many different versions of it. But think about what you would do at this point. How would you be telling Macbeth to act? How would you be telling him to go and approach those stairs? How would you stage it? You could go with the rewriting. You could retell this key scene as the story, trying to capture that ominous atmosphere and the nerves that both Banquo and Macbeth had. Remember, we see Banquo right at the start of this, very anxious to talk to Macbeth about his dream that he's having of the witches. Or analyse it. Create your mini essay. How does Shakespeare present Macbeth in this scene? Look closely at Macbeth's sanity here. To what extent do we see him as a victim? To what extent do we see him as somebody who is about to go and commit the worst sin? To what extent do we see him as in control of himself and his destiny?